at some point, I just stopped writing too. Even though I used to love escaping into a world of fiction, I gave up on writing anything myself. I decided nobody wanted to know what I really thought. Even though I used to put a lot of myself into my writing when I was a teenager, I don't know. I didn't want anyone to read it anymore. And when I didn't want anyone to read it because I didn't want anyone to know anything about me, it became pointless to write anymore. Plus the fact that it would never get published anyway, because obviously, as I said, the society I lived in, they started by banning fantasy, and then they moved on to things like sci-fi, and then even romance. It was just one after another, decided that it was influencing the minds of the youth in a bad, negative way. They removed the books one by one, and one of my final outlets for actual free expression, for escaping from getting away from the harshness of reality, disappeared. Because, of course, yeah, if I don't enjoy something, nobody else is allowed to enjoy it. It's definitely not that you should just, you know, not yuck somebody else's yum. You gotta let everybody else in the world know that they're terrible people for enjoying things, even if they're fiction, apparently. At least I'm free from that now. My story once so all the things I loved disappeared. The bookshops closed down. And I stopped writing completely. But essentially, the next part of the storyline is where I started to become the true archivist, the one that you guys all know and love from today. Essentially, they had like a program where I came from where when you were looking for jobs, you had to like sign up to a thing and you'd get like a basic income as like a weekly payment. But to do that, you had to prove that you were looking for a job, and you had to take whatever courses they told you to do. You had to do whatever work they told you to do. You had to prove how many like different workplaces you were applying to. And eventually they made me do a qualification for education. It wasn't like a full teacher's qualification at first. At first it was just like a childcare kind of thing. I fell into that and I was terrified because I hated children. To be completely honest, the children just see the world in a very like pure way, and they're very sharp with their words. They haven't really learned tact. So it was very much a case of, oh no, these children are going to figure out exactly who I am. They're going to tell their parents I am going to go in the same direction as my brother did. But that didn't end up happening. One of the first days that I was there was pretty good. I hung out with some kids. Eventually, I basically actually just spent the first while in a corner hiding. Letting everybody else play because, I mean, everybody was scared of me. The giant random man out of nowhere with the artificial eyes and the metal parts. And the marking, of course, over my eye, which told everybody that I was an undesirable. Someone who was never going to be allowed to have children and couldn't really be a proper member of society. Someone who was to be abandoned eventually. So none of them really wanted to deal with me until at one point, one brave child brought over a book and told me to read it. I did my best. It did not go well. I read a couple of pages and the child was just like, "That's not how you read it. You got to do the voices. You got to do the emotions. It's so boring." And so, as I did back when I was a kid, I thought about the way that my brother used to read to me. How he used to tell me such beautiful stories. How I used to fall asleep to his stories and get like invigorated and inspired by all the different tales of heroes and monsters and fantasies. Sci-fi, dark stories. So yeah. I tried. I did some silly voices. I did some dumb shit. I did some like visual acting. And by the time I finished the book, there were a bunch of kids standing behind me, looking over my shoulder to see the images as well. They had instantly fallen in love with that, and that basically became my job. Although I was there to actually help the teachers educate children and just to be essentially a teacher's assistant, I basically became the story guy. It got to the point where I didn't even like read the stories in the books. I would just like bring over a whiteboard, start telling stories just straight out of my head and drawing little silly doodles. Horrible doodles. But the kids loved it. They laughed along, and that really inspired me. I didn't have to like think too hard. I didn't really have to like think too much about the prose or the subject matter. I just said silly things about like characters interacting. People like Shiro the Fudan sheep who finds his courage. Shit like that. And it was the first time I was passionate about something in my life. It was the first time I found joy in something. I went from being a teacher's assistant to being a proper teacher. And then even when I moved on from that and started working in a library, I made sure that I was always the one who did the reading the children's sections, because that was what really brought me joy. Hanging out with kids and having a fun time. It felt like back when I was a child, except I'd taken the role of the big brother. So, yeah, that's what happened next. Finally found something I enjoyed. And then some shit happened. Essentially, it was no longer enough to just ban fantasy, sci-fi, romance. They decided to go after all of fiction. They decided anything that wasn't a direct allegory expressing the virtues of morality and the importance of respecting society was just no good. And so there were no more stories to tell. Everything was just histories. Everything was just very basic, blunt propaganda. There were no stories. There were no ways to escape. And so there was no real point in working in the library anymore either. Plus, fun times. My neuropathy was continuously progressing, as it always will. That's how life goes. So, I ended up in hospital more and more. And that was essentially when I started imagining Legatus. I started imagining the idea of a character who was very much like based on some of my favorite characters. Like I like the idea of like a morally gray, morally ambiguous kind of character who gets brought back from the dark side, or at least from the edge, by friends, who manages to see the error in their ways, find people that they care about, find family who can give them a reason to live on and to be a better person. And so that's where Legatus 505 started to come in. Even though I didn't write it, I just thought about it a lot. I thought about writing it someday. There was always a general feeling of like, hey, I want to write Legatus 505, but I just didn't have the time. I didn't have the emotions. There was always something in the way. And I'd like to tell you that this is real, but it isn't. That was just another fantasy. I always wished that there would be somebody who would reach out to me in that world, but there never was. Eventually, my neuropathy got so bad, it wasn't just the extremities, it wasn't just the vagus nerve, it wasn't something that they could contain anymore. It wasn't something that they could keep putting off with technology. And as I kept having more spasms, more attacks, more things that made me break down in public, more things that got reported to the council decided it was time, that I was completely undesirable, that I was no longer needed, that I was becoming a problem for society, making people feel bad simply by simply by living. And so they put me in a tiny white room. They put me in a tiny white room with two options. The netjack, which is written into Legatus 505 as like an ultimate weapon. A weapon that if used in the wrong kind of way, could end the entire world, could bring everything to ruin. If you accidentally used it in a wrong way without proper protection, the nanobots would just keep going and destroy everything. What the netjack actually does is if I simply press it to my neck and press the button, it will turn off my respirator. and give me a peaceful end. Let me go to sleep. And I very much considered the option. It was very heavy, it was very weighty, as I felt it in my hand, and I thought about it. But they also gave me something to at least distract myself, which was a way to escape reality for a final couple of however long I get to live, however many years. The other option was escaping into virtual reality and creating my own little world to live in. While I'm still in that world, I get to come here and spend time away from it, escape from reality, chill, have fun, and be a member of Nijisanji. Play with you guys, the voices in my head, and just have as much fun as I can while I'm here. And I decided that that was the better option. That no matter how much pain I'm in, no matter what else is going on, I don't want to give up, and I will always be here. I will always be fighting to get back here. And so that is the full lore of Archivist 404. I don't think I've ever shared this final image. But that's exactly what's going on. And so thank you guys for being my happy space. Thank you guys for being somewhere that I can escape to. Somewhere that we try to leave all the past behind, that we try to leave all the places of pain behind. But while we're here, we just try to have a good time and take care of each other. And yeah, how much of that influenced Legardus 505. And yeah, just how much it means to me to be here and to be with all of you. So thank you so much. Now I'm going to post. Oh, silly little confidant.